set to okay, so recording in progress, behave yourself. Welcome again. And then Jason, thank you for joining. And then would you start with telling something about yourself, but to make it more fun, can you tell a little bit about yourself in Greek and then translate it? And then let us hear what do we mean by speaking in Koine Greek. By the way, it's not modern Greek, it's Koine Greek. So some people immediately think this is modern Greek that is spoken in Greece. No, this is the Koine of the New Testament era.
Ναι, ναι, όρθος. Εγώ είμαι Γιάσον, όνομα μου Γιάσον και έχω 43 ετών. Έχω οικία, έχω γυναίκα, όνομα αυτή εστιν Στεφανία και φίλο αυτήν, Λίαν, και έχω 3 τέκνα. Έχω ένα ιόν, όνομα αυτό δωρεάν, και έχω 2 θυγατέρες. Η πρώτη θυγατέρα μου, όνομα αυτή εστιν αλήθεια. Αλήθεια εστιν truth, ναι. Όνομα αυτή αλήθεια και όνομα τη δεύτερα θυγατρή μου εστιν Αναστάσια.
Okay,
hey guys,
this is how the whole meeting is going to look like.
No.
For those who doesn't understand, you can just leave them. Thank you.
My name is Jason Weaver. I am 43, and I'm married to my wife now 24 years, I think.
Hey.
And we have 3 kids. My son's name is Dorian. He's 21. And then I have 2 daughters, Aletheia, which is truth in Greek. Aletheia is 18, just went to college. And then my third is Anastasia, and she's in her senior year of high school. I've spent my career in missions and working with a certain mission organization, training church planters and Bible translators and things like that. So I love the Lord. I love his word. And I'm excited just to be involved in what he's doing in the world. And I'm excited to be in this meeting and excited to be a part of CBELT as well. So thank you, all of you, for coming, and thanks, Marque, for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start. You have an MA in the New Testament from TEDS.
Mm-hmm.
And so apparently you learned Greek in that. Did you learn through the textbook, or did you learn communicatively when you first learned?
Yeah, so I first started working on Greek. What would that be? Oh, it's a long time ago. How about that? 20 plus years ago. But I used The Basics of Biblical Greek by William Mounts, which many of you probably are familiar with.
Yeah.
At least in the US, that's like the most common textbook in colleges and seminaries. And so I learned using what we call the grammar translation approach, which is where you learn about parts of the language, you learn about meanings of words, and then you look at Greek and, for me, put it into English so that I can understand it. So I translate it. So I started that back in 1998, actually, is when
That's the year I was born, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So you want me to just go ahead about my, as far as teaching experience, or
you learn it even in your MA, you learned like, did you go through syntax and other things in the grammar translation?
Yes, definitely. But at that point, I had already switched myself to learning communicatively and teaching communicatively, but my courses I was taking at Trinity were still grammar translation.
Who encouraged you, or motivated you to do communicatively? Where did you
Well, so, okay, so a lot of what I've been involved with is training people to go cross-cultural.
Mhm.
And one of the, of course, major values of being able to work with people in another language and culture is to actually learn their language and culture well, so
Mhm.
that you can clearly communicate. And so I was very familiar with this concept from early on in my career. And I don't remember exactly where I came across it, but I first came across material from the Biblical Language Center,
Mhm.
which Randall Booth started and has created a lot of their materials. And it was, the approach was saying, let's learn this language well. And that just kind of rang a bell with me because of how I was used to thinking about training people to learn other languages well in order to communicate. I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense to treat the Bible the same way. If we want to understand it as best we can, then we would attempt to understand the language and speak it and understand it as well as we can, as well as the culture of the scriptures as well. So the concept made sense.
Yeah. So
That part was easy.
the
Doing it.
the so we are curious, like even me, you're an amazing teacher, and no wonder you've been doing it for 30 years. And so, so how did you start learning? Like, what are the things that you went through? Like, what are the trainings? A lot of people here are curious. A lot of people are a part of CBELT. They just started communicatively, and then hear you speak and hear you speak more. The dream is, okay, I want to become like Jason, but so how do I become like Jason? So where
Hopefully
do you
you'll keep
start?
your
Like
hair.
the baby steps,
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
hair. The
Not
hair
the hair.
can
Yeah,
include it,
exactly.
but the other things. How
Um,
some of the baby steps that you took initially, and then
so part of what I did was beginning to listen to some material in Greek. And that was, I was using the curriculum put out by the Biblical Language Center. They've actually got some new curriculum out, which is really good. I was using the older curriculum where it showed pictures and then said, what it was in the picture, and then built up into telling little stories and things. And so I was learning to listen and comprehend things a little bit more. I still remember the first time something that I was learning through listening showed up in the Bible, and I understood the term immediately.
wow.
And it was the term gelos in James, which is the term for laughter. Let your laughter be turned into mourning. But I had been watching some of the lessons that had laughter in it, and I just read gelos and I knew what it was. And that was a very different experience from looking at words and then translating them into English.
Mhm, mhm.
So what usually you learn to do in a traditional grammar translation is to like look at Greek. And I mean, if you're listening to me, you speak English, at least some, but maybe another language you were taught in, I don't know. But for me, I would look at Greek, but I would think in English. So it's the best thing to call it is decoding. I was looking at one thing and thinking about another, and I learned to sync my English thinking up with Greek on the page, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But this experience of just reading that word and knowing and not translating it was a different experience.
Mhm.
And then, of course, that made me want to do that more. And so I continued speaking. I did start teaching. I taught Greek as well in a grammar translation approach, starting in 2003. I taught it about 5 years using the standard approach. I did a 2-semester course during the school year, and then I did a summer exegesis course, and I did that 5 times.
Wow.
And so I had taught it a good bit that way too, and learned how people learn. And some, I had some larger Greek classes, at least for what I was used to. I had 50, 60 people sometimes, in one of those classes. But then also I learned what people didn't remember after the fact. Even some of my best students at the time, then the next year, I remember talking and they didn't even know what Evcharistumen was, which is we give thanks. So yeah, I taught a lot that way, and then I started transitioning my teaching over, which was a gradual thing. And if you talk to people today that are advocating a communicative approach, people are there's a lot of variety in how much and how they're actually integrating communication into their teaching. A lot of times it's more like a grammar translation approach with some communication sprinkled on top. And I don't mean that negatively. I just mean it's better. I do think it helps a lot. And then you've got a few courses and people that are like, it's all Greek. We're just going to speak Greek only. Our grammar terms are going to be Greek. Everything we do is going to be Greek. And then you have most things in between.
Okay, so you have touched it a bit, but probably some people are very new to a communicative approach, some grammar translation. They're hearing for the first time today. The fun part is a lot of people who have learned Greek don't know what is grammar translation as well. So can you put in simple terms, maybe in 1 minute, what is grammar translation and what is communicative approach? What is the difference? And what?
Yes, grammar translation is the approach for teaching any language, but particularly Greek and Hebrew, where you learn rules of grammar. So, typically one of the earlier things you learn in a Greek class is the nominative and accusative cases. And you learn the endings in a chart. And then you learn how to look at words on the page and look at that ending chart. And then you figure out how to translate things. Okay, when I see this, it means man, and he's doing something. And then this thing is an action, and that's grammar translation. Communicative approach is one that seeks to actually use the language. And here's the key thing in the language. So you're using it, but you're trying to get people, like my goal as a teacher is to try to get people to hear Greek sounds and think meaning, nothing in between, as opposed to hear Greek sounds, think about what it looks like on a page, think about that in English, then get to meaning. That's kind of what people do when they first start trying to speak. If they've studied a lot of Greek, you can watch them. They're like running everything through all the grid works to figure out what it means. But what you want is for somebody to know that when you say here, it means hello. Somebody doing this. Okay, great. That's it. Here. Okay, cool. I don't need to think English. I don't need to think hello. I don't need to think, I said hello, I know, but I don't need to think about anything except what's going on. Or I know that when I say the word vous, it's this. That's it. I don't need the COW in English to know that. But when I start training my brain to think that way, then when I come across the word in reading, when I pronounce the sound, my brain goes, oh, I know that, and automatically pictures it. That's working within the language. So you're reading Greek, learning to read Greek as Greek, learning to understand Greek as Greek, with no middle language.
Yeah, we will, I think we will continue that more towards the later part. And why not just the classic question, why not just learn some rules and translate, why should we speak that language by? But now, how do we do this? How do we do this? So I want you to show all of us, and I think this one, it's a free lesson for those who have never taken Greek. I think they will also understand. But maybe we take 5 minutes just to show how a communicative. So traditional grammar, not traditional is not the right word because it's not the traditional one, but the grammar translation, we use a textbook. I think in the US, you use Mounds. Here, I've seen a few people using Mounds, but I think the most popular one is Wenham, and now the nice version, the Jeremy Duff textbook. And so grammar translation, just using a textbook and learning through it. Communicating is, learning to communicate. And so I want you to show us how, because we're asking two questions, how and why. And so how would
Yep.
the class look like? Or
Okay.
how would a CBELT class look like?
Very good. Now you will have to stop me because
Mhm.
once I get going, I'm not paying attention to 5 minutes. So just cut me off. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Let's go down a little bit. Carlos, nun emis mantanomen Alexis Elenikas. Aner. Aner estin. O aner estin. O aner. Aner estin anthropos. Aner estin anthropos. Anthropos. Que Guinea. Guinea. Guinea estin anthropos. Aner estin anthropos. Guinea estin anthropos. Anthropi. Anthropi isin. Anthropi. Who estin aner? Here. Aner estin. Who estin Guinea? Here. Guinea estin. Who estin anthropos? Guinea estin anthropos. Who estin anthropos? Aner estin anthropos. Carlos, aner Guinea. Katisate. Otos estin kuon. Kuon. Kuon estin. Kuon. Kuon uk estin anthropos. Estin zoon. Zoon. Anthropos, zoon. Zoon, anthropos. Kuon estin. Kuon. O kuon voa. Kuon. O kuon. Que alozoon estin vus. Vus. Evus. Vus estin. Vus estin zoon. 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 Anthropos. Anthropos. Guinea. Aner. Kuon. Vus. Erotemata. Who estin o kuon? Kuon. Who estin o aner? O aner. Aner estin. Aner estin. Who estin anthropos? Aner estin anthropos. Who estin zoon? Kuon estin zoon. Que vus. Evus. Allo echo. Artos. Artos estin. O artos estin. Que o artos uk estin anthropos. Uki. Uk estin zoon. Estin vroma. Ego estio vroma. Vroma estin. To vroma. To vroma. Artos. Artos. Que allo vroma stafule. 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 Stafule estin vroma. Vroma. Carlos. Pu estin stafule. Stafule estin. Pu estin kuon. Kuon. Kuon estin. Kuon estin. Que pu estin artos. Artos. Artos megas, Artos estin. O artos. Pu estin vroma. Vroma? Artos estin vroma. Carlos. Que stafule estin vroma. Stafule estin vroma. Que pu estin vus. Pu estin vus. Vus. Vus estin. que vos estin anthropos? Uki. Vos estin vroma? Ne. Ala vos estin zoon. Zoon. Ne? Zoon. Carlos, nin o aner estekin. O aner estekin. Que egune kathete. Kathete estekin. Kathete estekin. Eko katheme. Ego didaskalos Simon kathete. Inte cathedramu. Carlos. Estekin. Estekin. Que kathete. Kathete. Ti pui egune. Ti pui egune. Egune kathete. Egune kathete. Ti pui oaner. Okay. Estekin. Oaner estekin. Estekin oaner que kathete egune. Aner peripati. Actors peripati. You hear that? Peripati. Actors peripati. Que afte kathete. Actors peripati. Que nun egune anastethi. Treche. Egune trechi. Egune trechi. Que oaner peripati. Peripati. Trechi.
Okay.
Carlos.
Paste. Ευχαριστώ.
Ne, uden estin. Carlos.
It's amazing because if I'm sitting with a textbook and studying Greek, 5 minutes sometimes is like half an hour or 1 hour, and you've almost spoke for like 8 minutes, but it's
Okay.
feels like very short. So that is where I think we start answering why. Like for me.
Yep.
I've taught Greek for I think 6-7 years now, and then I've used textbooks. And whenever we start the course, everybody's just on fire. Oh, we're gonna learn Greek. Read the New Testament in the original Greek, and then we reach maybe the imperfect, and then maybe the aorist, and then by the time we reach the perfect or just the participles words.
Oh yeah,
everybody's just like like. Everybody understood? Yes, sir. But I know like only 2 people understood in the class. The language learning is hard. And then I think it's very hard. It takes a lot of commitment and dedication. But what I found in the living language approach and how we have just demonstrated is that this living language for sure has a pedagogical, advantage of being engaging and effective, and also being just the learning process is enjoyable. A lot of people are traumatized in seminary because of Greek and Hebrew. They need to pass it, and then that's the worst subject, Greek, Hebrew, But I think this can change. But what are some of the things, just pedagogically on the pedagogy side? What are start with the aesthetics and the enjoyment of it, but what are some things, because you have experienced both? Want to comment on some things?
Yeah, I mean, there's several things. Number one, the way that we are designed by God to learn language is by speaking and hearing and using it. And so one important thing is that when we actually use the language and learn it that way, that opens up the class to all types of learners. So if you're doing a textbook translation method of teaching, then what happens is you have a small group of people in your class that are analytical thinkers. They like to analyze and break everything down. And they usually do really well because you're teaching analysis is what you're actually doing. So they usually do really well. But then other people who don't think grammar, they don't do well.
Mhm, mhm.
and the class is often a waste to them, or as you talked about, they even quit or drop out, or at least in the US. I don't know about India, but
Oh, in
the
India, we
US,
don't
everybody
have,
just quit.
in India, we don't have the option of dropping out, so we just cheat.
Okay. Yes.
Copy the assignments
Oh,
and
cheat. Okay. You just make it happen, right?
like, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Mhm.
I've found in teaching, like, I haven't had anybody that didn't enjoy Greek class. And I mean, of any type of learner, of any age that I've taught or anything like that. Now, enjoyment doesn't equal learning, but
Yeah,
enjoyment does encourage learning.
of course.
So, I mean, just because it's fun doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. But when it's enjoyable, you're more willing to engage, and it keeps your mind awake and interested. When it's boring, you kind of zone out, and you don't learn as well, and you're not motivated. And also, like a kind of a basic rule of education is that the more the teacher just talks at you, and that's all, that's only a certain type of learning. But when the student is able to use, like, I don't have anything. If I was teaching a writing class, I could stand up and talk about writing for 3 hours. Or I could say, this is how you write 2 letters. And then I could have people take out their, paper and practice writing. And then that's how they actually learn it. Then they can ask questions. Oh, when I was doing that, I didn't know how to make this. Oh, yeah, let me show you. So it's the same type of thing with language, is that when someone actually is trying to use it, they actually not only do they understand it better, but they also know how they don't understand it. They have better ideas of what types of questions to ask. Like, well, how would I say this? So that's part of the reason is it's easier for everybody to learn. Another reason that's really important is that we want to read, in New Testament Greek, at least we want to read the New Testament. That's the goal. So then often the question is, why should we put all this effort into speaking and listening if our only real desired outcome is reading? It's a fair question. I think it's a great question. So my answer to that is, if you only want to read, you could do a grammar translation approach, and you could teach yourself to translate, and you could become, pretty decent at doing that. Okay. But the neat thing about speaking, there's a few things to say here, but the neat thing about speaking and listening is if you can speak this much, you can read this much. So the more you increase your speaking and listening ability, it exponentially increases your reading ability. Because reading is passive. And by that, I just mean, you look at it, you don't have to create anything when you read, right? You just have to understand what's being said. That's the easier activity. Okay. But if you learn how to speak and compose certain things, you can read them quickly. If you don't learn how to do those things, then you have to learn reading by reading only, and you're gonna progress at a certain pace. But if I learn how to talk and interact and all that, then my brain is opening up to how the language works, and then reading is much faster. Another thing I want to point out is some of you may have seen some of this discussion before, but even how we define what reading actually is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Grammar translation technically doesn't teach you to read. It teaches you to translate. And here's the difference. Reading is understanding a text in the language it's written in. Translation is putting it in a different language, right? And if I'm looking at a sentence, Utos gar agapes en otheos ton kosmon, the beginning of John 3:16, and I come across that in my Greek New Testament, and I say utos in this way, okay, like that, okay, utos gar, four, utos four gar, uto leswe gar. Okay, utos gar agape sin. That's a aorist, first person or third person singular. And I go through all of this stuff. I'm only paying attention. I'm using so much brain power, one word at a time, that I'm not actually paying attention to the statement. I'm paying attention to each piece because that's about all I can do at once. But if I understand what utos garigapis and otheos ton cosmon means, I can keep reading. And I can maintain the thought process that John is putting out there, and I can keep going. So meaning in any language, in any written text, meaning comes in bulk. It's in sentences and paragraphs and things like that. It's not usually just in individual words. There is meaning in individual words, but what I want to say, I don't say to you in one or two words, especially me. I say it in lots of words put together in a certain way. So to be able to read the New Testament can only really be done in the language itself. And you have to be familiar enough with the language to be able to move through it quickly so that you can maintain the thought flow as you work through it, as opposed to one thing at a time, which I don't know how many of you are familiar, but we have this phrase called you lose the forest for the trees, which means you're so focused on one tree, you don't see that you're in the middle of a huge forest with lots of trees. And it's kind of the same thing. You get so focused on a small piece that it's harder to pay attention to the larger idea. Another thing is when you learn to read better, you can read more widely. At least like for me, I read regularly, I read the New Testament and I read the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And I read some other things too. I'd like to be better at other time frames of Greek. Classical Greek is older and things like that. But being able to read things outside of the Bible increases my understanding of the language, which then increases my understanding of, so let's say there's 3 words that could be used that the Apostle John could use for this statement. And he picks one, and that's the only one that ever shows up in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, if I've learned the other 2 in other places, then I know why. I can probably figure out why he picked this one instead of these 2. That's a greater understanding of the text of Scripture by having an understanding of broader texts as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. I want to ask a few of those questions that you have already asked. By the way, now the room is open for questions, so you can send the questions now. I see already some questions on my chat. Please send me directly the questions so that we can start asking. But I have a few questions. You showed us, o anthropos, o anerest in anthropos. So the communicative approach sort of it works differently with different schools, but it doesn't explicitly, teach grammar. Doesn't explicitly teach grammar. So the first question, which should be an easy answer, but people keep asking, how do you learn? We are so, I think, controlled or manipulated or whatever by the grammar translation. People are always asking. The first question is, how do we learn a language without grammar? Yeah. But then with the easy answer and the immediate answer is, how did you learn as a child? We never learn. I have a 3-year-old son. He speaks English and Polish. He's not, I don't tell him that's a plural, that's the singular. That's, you need to put the, the subject first. But so that's the easy answer. But is there like more to that? If you want to say something more to that, how do you teach a language without grammar? Explicitly talking about grammar.
Well, I have a few thoughts. Number one, grammar is not bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some people learn faster by giving them pieces of grammar as they go. Some people, the grammar, when you talk about grammar, it confuses them. They can actually do in the language what I want them to do, but when I say, now that's a nominative and it's the subject and did it, what? can we just go back to oner este iton arton? I don't, so some people grammar is helpful and it can accelerate learning. All right. So like a child learns by just using it and being corrected. Now we may not want to, we don't really want to take as long as a child takes necessarily to learn. So as adult learners, we like to understand things more, and that's okay. But sometimes you got to use the language some without understanding it, and then you can understand it later. And that leads me to probably the main answer I would have to your question. Grammar, a rule of grammar, is best understood after the language has been used according to that rule. So if I can show people enough times that, when you have something, echo ten staphylain, echo ton arton, echo ten vun, echo ton cunus, echo tus anthropus, that the form changes. So you know how that always sounds different? Yeah, that's because it's an object, and that uses the accusative form. And you always do that when a verb happens to it. Oh, okay. But if I just explain that from the beginning with no experience, some people will get it and most people will not. But if they've actually done it over and over, then you put a name on it. It's like, oh yeah, okay, all right. Then you can understand it. So even grammar itself is better grasped and retained after it's been experienced, basically. So you can learn a language with no grammar, but it will take longer. And you can try to learn it with all grammar, but it will be very difficult and will take a long time as well for the average person.
So normally in seminary, a person who's good in Greek is the smart student.
Yeah.
And then maybe they are. But only smart student learns Greek or are good at Greek or are the friends of the Greek teacher or the teacher, the rest are just lost. But in this communicative approach, you've already said this, but a little bit earlier, but I want to just emphasize it because a lot of students are learning Greek now, and then how does it work? Like, is it easier for everyone to be on board and everyone to learn Greek together? Or is it, how does it work when you compare it, grammar translation and believing language, communicating? Yeah. Normally what I've seen is in grammar translation, which I have experienced, a lot of students are lost halfway. So is Greek only for smart students, or how would you answer that?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is everybody can speak a language unless they actually have like severe mental, struggles. And so everybody can learn how to use language, whether they're analytical or not. But the method matters. I have seen in my classes, what I've experienced is this. When I keep it highly communicative, everybody is keeping up. Some are faster because that's just natural. Some start making grammar rules on their own already, and some are just responding and mimicking. And so everybody moves along well. When I start to get more grammar, which if I only have a certain amount of time, I usually do that, then there starts to be a bigger gap between certain types of learners and other types of learners. So there's a direct correlation between how grammar heavy something is and how easily everybody can follow along. If it's more grammatical, then there's a big gap between the few that get it and the rest that don't. If we're using it over and over, everybody is moving along kind of at a similar pace.
Yeah, okay. In relation to that, people have said, and I don't know how true it is, but you would know, is that normally the communicative approach takes more time to learn and more effort. Yep. And so how does it practically work? Okay, we have 2 semesters in a Bible college, or, there are other studies. As a pastor, there are other subjects I need to learn, right? So if it takes more time, or does it take more time, or how does it work? or like even in terms of results, like, okay,
Mhm.
grammar translation is introducing a lot in a textbook, 30
Yes,
chapters, it's a lot. And we
yes,
know a lot of things, but maybe are we competent to use them? Or
that's a different
so those
question.
are some of the things.
Yes,
Let me hear
yes,
your thoughts on some of those things.
yes. In general, it is going to take a little bit longer
Mhm, mhm.
this way. And the reason is because, and I don't mean this the wrong way, but you're actually learning it instead of learning about it.
Mhm.
There's a difference. And I would rather somebody who wants to learn to read the New Testament, I would rather them learn 10 things well than learn about 30 things in Greek. And so if we do a communicative approach with some grammar in there as appropriate and helpful, then you're not going to cover the same amount of topics as a first-year Greek course does in grammar translation. But what you do cover, they're going to understand better and they're going to retain it better. And while they're still going to have forms in a text that they don't know, when they see legi and ipen and, agape and all of these different things that they've used and anastethi, they'll understand them like that. So I think we have to adjust the paradigm. And this is why people are having a hard time in academia adopting the approach, because it really requires a restructuring of the whole progression, not just the first year class.
Yeah. And also, as you're there, I want to ask, like, how do you know, or an arrest in Anthropos, from there, how do you move to the New Testament,
Yeah.
What is the process? I know it can be long, but because, okay, here, post, okay, good,
Yeah.
good, but
It's cute and fun and yeah.
But what about the New Testament? Like, why is it, the same question again in a different way? Why is it not, let's just take some grammar, analyze and understand the New Testament?
Yeah. I think it's actually surprising. If you, like a normal grammar translation class, you learn vocabulary based on how frequent it is in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. So you're learning things like maybe righteousness in the first, 5 weeks or something like that. Whereas in a communicative class, you're learning like shirt and head and mouth and hand and bread, and those kinds of things. Well, what's cool about that is those are actually, if you learn a language, the first thing you're going to learn is numbers and body parts and, colors and those kinds of things. And those are actually in the Bible. But not only that, they're also, so I'll get theoretical for a second. Language, there's concrete language about concrete things, like the dog and the house and food and me and, and then there's like metaphorical language. The light fights against the darkness. Well, we got to have literal light before I can talk about it metaphorically. And so if I can build a competency with the concrete parts of language, I can begin to understand the abstract usage of the language. So there's more going on than just which we're not learning the right words, when we do this. But I do progress a lot. I use a lot of different methods, which I don't have time to show here, but we do get up to reading certain texts well, and then you just keep using language. I can use the aorist. We can do drills that will help us learn the aorist, and then we can do simple things that are meaningful, like Marke, TF, I guess. Semeron. Artem, Kalos. So I said, what did you eat today, Mark? Oh, I ate bread. So you can start to talk about your own day. And if you just do that 5 minutes every day, you're actually learning a lot of vocabulary that is actually vocabulary used all throughout the New Testament. But you're learning it in a deeper, different way. I have had, there's one group of students that I've taught in the last year where I taught them for 2 weeks, and then I didn't see them again for 3 months, and I taught them for another 2 weeks. And it took about 1 to 2 days to get them where they were when I left after 3 months, just one or 2 days, and they're right back. So when you use a language, it goes deeper into your memory, and you're able to retain it much longer than if you just learn to translate it. What most pastors and stuff will tell you, oh yeah, I took Greek, but I don't remember any of it. Oh yeah, I studied Hebrew, but it's gone. But if you actually speak it, it comes back a lot faster when you try to speak it or read it.
Yeah, I think the goal and also the retention, I think, is David Miller has wrote a book about Greek pedagogy in crisis, and then he said that a lot of people who are, I think, at an MDiv level, who have learned Greek a lot, like 70 to 90%, never are able to use it competently.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the problem is not the student, but part of the problem is the method. And that we need to do something. So retaining. For me, I was thinking recently. I was reading the New Testament, and I was reading on, and then I saw erchete, and then erchete. I felt like erchete is so close to me. Erchete before, I've studied erchete or erchome. I know that, but I've been taking the CBELT course, and now we're doing erchete, o anthropos erchete, and then I see the picture, the Koine erchete.
Yeah.
I see erchete, Jesus erchete, and I was like, oh, like I didn't change any theology, but I just felt like, hey, like wow, like
it actually means something.
So home, the word. So
those
are, I think, the aesthetic parts of it. Another, I think, I'm not getting a lot of questions, but one thing that and then scholars are, or people who are hesitant to take a communicative approach, is this, that there is not enough input, in the sense that somebody asked, how important is Koine Greek in today's world? So in relation to that, you can respond to that, but also in relation to that, part of the reason that a lot of scholars are hesitant to take this communicative approach is, they say there's not enough input. Like, we're using second language, modern language approach, second language principles to learn, acquisition to learn, but we speak modern language, there are living languages, but Koine is that, and so there's not enough exposure, one. And also, when there is, I've heard, I heard one scholar saying that a lot of times, the conversation are not artificial, and it does not really go with the New Testament, syntax sometimes. So how would you respond to, two of those?
Well, okay, so 2 questions. As far as how much input is there, comprehensible input, it is true that it's challenging. If I wanted to learn, German or Polish or Russian or I can't say Indian, that makes me look like a dumb American. I'm sorry. Anyway, if I want to learn another language, today I can go somewhere and live among people who speak it, and I can get all kinds of exposure. And so I can learn it a whole lot faster. But it's true that with biblical languages, or Greek in particular, it's hard to do that. It is more difficult. And the small community of us that are trying to do this, one of the tasks that we have in front of us is to get enough material. I'm working right now on some vocabulary lists that I came across that are giving a lot of basic day-to-day life vocabulary in Koine Greek. And so I'm working on that and looking them all up and translating them and making lists that can be used. But here's the other thing, in a communicative class, you may not use righteousness much, okay, for example. But if you learn certain words in the language and you learn the patterns of the language by talking about daily activities, those patterns pretty easily transfer to other vocabulary. So if I can learn how to do anything truly and well in Greek, then that is a valuable thing to using the language, period. I don't have to be just talking about theological things in Greek in order for it to be profitable for my New Testament reading. I can be talking about what you ate yesterday and how many kids I have and, my wife's name and all of those things. And that still is super helpful because I'm using real words with real meaning that have certain patterns, all of which are in the New Testament. And so being able to meaningfully use a language is as important or more than learning the exact vocabulary of the text you want to read. For example, I was working on this vocabulary list and I'm like, hey, I was telling my wife, I found all these words for this and that and that. She's like, is any of that in the New Testament? I was like, no, but here's why that doesn't matter. If I can learn to drive down the road and talk about all the birds that I see and talk about the marsh and the ocean, and the different types of trees, I'm internalizing the language structure.
Yeah.
Then I can put new vocab in it and it's a whole lot easier. Yeah. So being able to use the language in a real way internalizes the interworkings of the language. And then I can just feed new vocab into that way easier. So.
Yeah. And also, I think that's what the grammar translation at best does. They just show you luo, lue is lue,
Yeah.
luo and lue, and then you have to figure out the rest of the form. Anyway, another question, has this method implemented anywhere else than English-speaking world?
Good question. So yes, English-speaking, other than the English-speaking world. I know of a few. I know there are a couple of schools in Jerusalem, in Israel, that are using this approach for Greek and Hebrew. Now, Israel speaks a lot of English too, but I do know of a few places in Africa where this is being used. But here's what I think, and what I'm excited about is one thing about this method is it makes Greek and Hebrew more accessible to people that don't speak English very well. Because if I can go to, wherever, if I can go to Senegal, Africa, or if I can go to an island of Indonesia, in Poland, and East India, if I can go and start to do a class where only maybe 10% of it is in English, then people who don't speak English aren't severely limited by that fact. Because the truth is, a lot of people in the world speak multiple languages, even if English isn't one of them. And they know how to learn. They actually are more experienced at learning language than most Western people that speak English as their main language. So if we can offer it to them in that format, I think that the church around the world will be able to take the biblical languages to a deeper level and take them on themselves and not be dependent on the English speakers' grammar terms. Yeah. They can know how the language works in and of itself because they can use it.
So in Poland, the camp, we're having a camp this month in Poland towards the end of this month, 2 camps, short immersive camps, and some of them don't know English, Jason.
Yeah, all right.
So they will just understand you in Greek, and they will not know English at all.
That would, to answer the question a little bit further, that would probably make the class better in some ways. And because then it would force us to use that language to actually communicate. Sorry.
Yeah, and also I think even Randall Booth started, what he started because of Bible translation, and he wanted to impact, I think, the non-English speaking world.
Yes, exactly.
And then now Aleph with Beth, I think, on YouTube. She does only, and she's doing it for free. It's because she's not doing for Americans. She's doing for
Yeah.
She's doing for the non-English speaking world. She doesn't use a single English, just Hebrew.
Yep.
And it's amazing that it's up for free. And then, so I think, yes, it's done by English speaking people, but I think the goal, one of the goal is to make biblical languages more accessible to people,
Yes.
and in a less academic way, in a less Western way, I think.
Yes.
And then we have, CBELT in India, so of course we use English a
Yeah.
lot. That's another thing.
That would be my dream, is to see non-English speakers being able to learn the biblical languages and to take hold of their faith in that way, and be able to have those roots to pass down to the church in their area, down through the generations.
I've told you already, but you're going to have a lot of children in India and other parts of the world. Great children.
Carlos, Jero.
One last question. I think we're over time. One last question is, if we learn modern Greek, okay, that's a good, reasonable start. Will there be any difficulties in understanding the Bible since it is in Koine Greek?
Okay, so I'm not 100% sure on the statistic that I'm about to give you, but I have heard that modern Greek is maybe like 50% overlap with Koine Greek. That means half of it is similar and half of it is not. I don't know exactly how correct that is, but it probably gets the picture across. I think if you were a modern Greek speaker fluently, then your background of speaking modern Greek would help you learn Koine better. I think if you have money and time just to spend, I think you should move to Greece and learn modern Greek. But most of us don't have that. And that would be like a step towards learning Koine better. I would like to learn modern Greek, but I don't know if it's going to happen. So I don't think, unless you are actually going to learn modern Greek fluently in a short period of time, if you're able to do that, then I think that could be helpful. And then you could just make the transition to Koine. But if you're going to learn modern Greek a little bit along the way, you should just start with Koine a little bit along the way. That's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, I've seen a few YouTube videos that somebody was reading ancient Greek, probably not from the Bible, but to the on the streets of Greece, and this guy had no idea what it was. Probably because they use an Erasmus pronunciation, in the reading, but also there's another recent video about two scholars, one a scholar in modern Greece and the modern Greek, another one ancient Greek, and they were reading and they were laughing, and then this modern Greek speaker was saying, "I have no idea what you read," and so, but is there anything I'm also curious about this, how the overlap you said, is there anybody doing some research on what is the
I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly don't know. I would imagine, I think a lot of times the Western American Bible scholar world is kind of disconnected from the biblical scholar world in Greece. I think they would probably have a lot to say about that, but I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I think we should wind up. We are over time, but thank you so much again for doing this, and thank you. Efkaristo, see, and thank you everyone else for joining. And finally, before we close, for those who are, a lot of you are learning Greek with us already, either in Logos College or in CBELT, but if there anybody else as a guest here and you want to learn Greek, you want to try, maybe you're a Greek teacher or a student, you want to try learning Greek communicatively, you can always get in touch with us. There is a Facebook page we have, CBELT Center for Bible Exposition, Language and Translation. So you can always reach out there, or if you know me or whoever gave you the link would know how to get connected to us. So you're always welcome. We have online course going on. And then we're hoping that Jason will come next year to India and we'll have a camp for 2 weeks. How cool is that?
Yeah.
2 weeks just speaking Greek, eating Greek, and sleeping Greek, and but
Καλά.
anyway, thank you everybody. Thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Ερώστε.
Eroste.
Ακριστό διδάσκαλε.
Ναι, μάλιστα.
Καλώς τε, καλώς τε.
Ορίστε, ορίστε. Ευχαριστώ, διδάσκαλε.